Hi, this is Simon Obstill and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. And today we're going to be taking a look at this project. Now this was inspired by seeing a man doing light art using a fluorescent tube, and it looks something like this, so I thought I'd see what it would be like to try and recreate it in Motion. So over in Motion, I just want to point out that I'm working in 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, and I've chosen a duration of 15 seconds. So the first thing I want to do is to build our room, and to do that I'm going to import two pieces of artwork. I'll put a link to this in the comments along with the finished project. Now, you're probably aware that when you bring in images that are oversized, they get scaled to fit the dimensions of the project. So we just need to make these both 100%. Now what I've done is for my walls, I've made an image that's 2000 pixels wide by 1000 pixels high. And for my floor and ceiling, so that it matches, I've made that 2000 by 2000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a group for each of these, and it'll become obvious why shortly. Call this floor, etc. And let's call this walls. And I'm going to make a clone of each of those. So right click, make clone layer for the floor. Let's call that element floor. For that walls group, right click, make clone layer, makes another group. Let's call this walls, that bit in there. Okay, I just want to move these, it's possibly a little bit confusing, so I just want to move these master groups down to the bottom there and turn them off. So now we've got two groups, one with a clone of the floor and one with a clone of the walls. So let's turn off that floor group to start off with, and let's concentrate on the walls. So the first thing I want to do is build the side wall. So I'm going to enter a value of 90 on the Y rotation, and I'm going to move it to -1000 on X. Then I'm going to duplicate that and move it to +1000 on X. Duplicate it one more time. This is for the back wall. Zero out that X position and have a Z position of -1000, and obviously we don't want that Y rotation. So now we've built our walls. Let's call that walls master. Then let's take our floor, and first of all we want to rotate it through 90 degrees on X and then move it up 500 pixels on Y. Need to turn that group on in order to see what I've done. So that's made the ceiling, and now duplicate again. -500 on Y makes the floor. Now this doesn't look very much like a real world room. And the reason for that is that in the real world, in all of the corners, the light gets trapped and it creates this effect called ambient occlusion. And that's just a darkening of that area there where the light just can't find its way out. So it makes a little sort of shadow effect. So I'm going to make that using our original groups. Let's just call this floor, etc. master. Close that up. Close this one up, close those two up so we can concentrate on our original. So the floor here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rectangle tool and I'm going to draw a rectangle. And I'm going to reset its transform, come to shape, geometry. Now you remember that our floor is 2000 pixels wide, so I'm going to set that value to 2000. I'm going to come to style, brush color, let's make it pretty dark, like something like that. Let's set a width of 40, I mean, and then come to filters, blur, Gaussian blur, and set that amount to 100. So I'm going to turn on our floor and walls so we can see the difference that's made. So if I turn that rectangle on and off, you can see that that's put in a little bit of shading along the floor and ceiling. So we just need to do the same thing with our walls. So what I'm going to do is select that rectangle, hold down the Option key and drag it into that walls group above my image. And all we need to do is just adjust that geometry. So as I said, 2000 wide by 1000 high. Now I think I probably haven't made that rectangle dark enough, so I'm going to Command select both of those so I can adjust that color simultaneously as we look at it. And I think I'm going to go really quite dark, somewhere like that. So now if we turn those both off, you can see the difference. That's where we were, and this is where we are. And that's immediately, without putting any lighting in, that's looking like a real world room because of that ambient occlusion effect. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, let's close up some groups, is we're going to make a text object so we can trace out our light art effect. So I'm going to make a new group here, object new group. I'm going to take my text tool and I'm going to type the word light in capitals. And I quite like this condensed font that I've got here. I'm going to make the size 400 so it's fitting quite nicely within our scene. Reset its transform so it's centered up. Just want to come back to that text and reset the baseline to -100 so that it's centered up. It's going to come to properties and I'm going to make this quite faint. So let's go for 20. So we can just use this as a guide for drawing our light path. So now I'm going to select the paint stroke tool. That's what this one here. And I'm going to open up the HUD just to set it up. So we want a width of 20 pixels. So you can adjust that using that width control there. We want this to look as though somebody's actually drawing it by hand. So I'm just going to draw with my mouse. Obviously, a pen is going to give you a much nicer result, but I'm just going to use the mouse. Just draw down quite freely like that to create an L. Just want to give it a little bit of sort of human quality as I draw each letter. You can always come in and tidy these up later. But what we want to do is introduce some kind of that organic flowing quality. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go in and maybe just give them a little bit of a tweak. So let's zoom in there. If we select our Edit Points tool from the menu down here and turn on the overlays, we can just fine-tune those. I think T is okay. This one we can probably just, deleting points is a good idea just to tidy it up a bit. The G, maybe we can delete that point there. This one here, give it a bit more of a flow around that corner there. The L, maybe I got a little bit carried away with that. So that's probably quite good. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my text guide there, and that's really not looking too bad. It's got a nice organic feel to it. So while we're in this group, I want to make a path that includes all the letters. So for that, I'm going to use the Bezier shape tool. So again, opening up the HUD, let's go for a pixel width of 20. And I'm just going to follow exactly what I did with my paint stroke tool. So I'm not going to worry about making it organic this time. What I'm doing, you see, is I'm doing a continuous path for the light. And I'm going to call this path. And I'm going to drag it out into a new group like that. This I'm going to call text, that group there. Let's turn off that path group. Right, this text group we're going to turn into a clone. So close it up, right click, make clone layer. And then having done that, turn off that group there. We're going to make a replicator. So object replicate. What we want to do is select line from the shape there. And we want to turn on 3D. Let's zero out those values there. And I just want to open up this end here so I can access the Z value. And there I'm going to type a value of -1000. And I'm going to set the points for the time being to 30. What we're going to do now is create a bit more transparency in between all of these. So I'm opening up the opacity gradient there. Let's make a new opacity tab by clicking on that top there. And two more, like so. So I'm going to click on this one here. I'm going to set its actual opacity value to 5 and its location there to 5. This one here, opacity value 5, location 95. So what we've done is we've made the middle of this replicated object much more transparent than the beginning and ends. You'll see we've got stepping here, but we'll increase the number of points later on to take care of that. So I'm going to call this replicator main, and then I'm going to duplicate it, right-click, duplicate. And I'm going to call this replicator glow, because the glow is going to be an important factor here. Let's zoom out a bit. Right, I don't need all these points. In fact, I only need 2 for the glow to work. So I can reduce that number down to 2. Then I'm going to come to Filters, Blur, and add a Gaussian blur. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that 4 times, so we end up with 5 altogether. So I'm going to use Command D, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first blur amount I'm going to set to 64, the second one to 128, which is twice 64, the third one to 264, which is twice 128, the fourth one to 512, which again is doubling it, and the last one to 1024, which doubles it again. So we want to progressively reduce the mix value of these. So I'm going to set the mix value of that one there to 10, this one to 20, this one to 30, and this one to 50. Then I'm going to take this replicator glow object and add some color correction to it. Add levels like that. And here I'm going to select, instead of RGB, I'm going to select alpha. And if we grab this white value here and drag it down quite a lot, you'll see that we're getting this really nice glow effect. So there you go, that was quite easily achieved. What we're going to do is we want to colorize this overall thing. So you remember right at the bottom here, we've got a clone of our text group. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a color curves to that. Or you could use levels if you prefer. And what I'm going to do is take the blue value and just bring down the white like that. So next, let's add a light. So add object, light. Now, I don't want to switch to 3D because I want to selectively enable the 3D groups. So I'm going to keep us 2D. And what I want to do is this group here, which has got the light art in it. I don't want that to make that 3D, but I do want to make my room, or rather my 2 rooms here. I want to make both of those 3D. And you'll see they've now been influenced by the light. But my light art is still looking nice and bright because we haven't made that 3D. So I'm just going to make my base light here a little bit blue so we can get some nice color contrast. So we've got our yellowish light art and our nice cold blue room. I'm also going to add another light. So to that I'm going to duplicate this one, and this one I'm going to make yellowish like that. I'm going to increase the intensity of this quite a bit. Let's go for 300. It's really nice and bright, but let's increase the fall off to 10 so it's not actually spilling around too much. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to get our text to write on. So I'm going to select all of these text objects in that group, all 5 of them. Behaviors, shape. I'm going to use write on. Then I want to come to 2 seconds on the timeline like that. Select all of these write on behaviors by command clicking them. And then I'll hit O on the keyboard. And those will all be shortened down to 2 seconds long. And so those are all now writing on simultaneously. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to open up the video timeline. Video timeline, is it always been called that? And what we're going to do is we're going to shift all of these so one starts after the other. So deselect and move that one along, so it starts. I'm leaving slight gaps. Not being too pedantic about this. You might want to decide to have some letters write on a little bit quicker or slower than others, but I won't waste your time with that. So now those are all writing on sequentially. That's really good. So now what we want to do is to get our yellow light, this one here, to follow along as the text is being drawn on. And to do that, we're going to use this path that we created, if you remember that, in our group there. And we're going to use that to get the light to follow that path. So what we're going to do, first of all, is select the path, come to Behaviors, Shape, and add a write-on behavior. And if we come to the last frame of that animation, so you'll need to find that for yourself somewhere around there, we want to, with the write-on selected, hit O on the keyboard to shorten that down. So it's only running for that duration. Then we're going to come to our light, Behaviors, Basic Motion, Motion Path, and under Path Shape we're going to select Geometry, and then we're going to drag that path into the source for the shape. So that's following along that motion path, but again we need to come to the end of the animation there and hit O on the keyboard to make sure it's shortened down to be the right length. Now if you're eagle-eyed, you'll spot that it's not really following along perfectly, because obviously we've got these extra bits that it needs to follow, but it's kind of good enough for the purposes of this. And if you really wanted to get fancy about it, what I would recommend is you select that write-on behavior and you do come to Object, Convert to Keyframes, and then you can fine-tune exactly how that write-on is happening, so it's perfectly timed. But I'm going to just stick with that for now rather than waste your time on showing you how to do that. So next, let's add a camera. So add Object Camera, and let's set the angle of view to 75. So it gives us a more dramatic effect. And let's give it some animation. So Behaviors, Basic Motion, Throw. Let's come to Properties here. I'm going to set that X position, the initial X position, to -360. And what I need to do, obviously, is I need to turn that light arc group back to 3D. And you'll notice that in doing so, what's happened is that it's now being affected by the lighting. So let's just turn that lighting off, come down to there, shading off. So it's being affected by the camera, but not by the lights. So open up this throw velocity. Let's just work out how far we want to push it on Z. Let's come over to there, let's say. I want my initial Z position to be quite a long way out, so let's increase that because our room is quite big. Let's make the most of it. Something like that. We're at about 550 on Z. And then we can use the throw to push in if we enter a negative value like that. So now we're getting that sort of camera move. You can see how badly that light is not quite matching, but so that's our animation. You'll see that those steps will need to be added to just to smooth that out. But there's one other thing I want to do before we look at that, and that's to create a much more realistic effect of the light hitting the floor. And this is really the fancy part, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that path and I'm going to make a clone of it. So right click, make clone layer. And I'm going to drag that out to a new group at the top here. Then I'm going to come to Filters, Stylize Min-Max, set the mode to maximum and the radius to 40. That's created a blocky version of it. So I'm going to come to Properties, zero that out. I'm going to set a X rotation of 90 and then a Y position of -499. And now it's sitting down there on the floor. What I might just do is push it back a bit on Z, so it's around about there. So where we are -500. And I might even use the scale to scale it up on Y, so 200 on Y. So what we need to do is we need to add a blur, so blur, Gaussian blur. A value of about 300 is going to do us. We need to turn this group to 3D. like so. Probably pushed it back a little bit too far on Z. Let's center it up more. Maybe negative 250 is good. Okay, so this is not looking particularly impressive as it is, but we're going to do something really fancy now. What we're going to do is we're going to take our floor texture all the way down there at the bottom, and I'm going to alt drag it into our group at the top there. Let's zero it out. And what we want to do is we want to rotate it through 90 degrees and bring it down to negative 499. So you can see it's effectively sitting in the same position as our original floor. And what we're going to now do is add an image mask to this clone layer. So right click, add image mask. And we're going to use that floor and ceiling, drag it into the mask source and set the source channel to luminance. And we're not going to see a great deal at this point because we need to add a filter to that ceiling texture to make it push through. So let's add levels. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the white down quite a bit, like that. Bring the black in. And now I think you can see what's happening is that we've got this really nice light effect. And this is what's called a specular map. So just the raised areas of the floor are being illuminated and the kind of rough patches in between are not. And that really makes for a very sexy result, I think. So we can do exactly the same thing with the ceiling. So let me call that floor. I suppose this is a reflection, really, even though it isn't strictly speaking. Let's duplicate that and call it ceiling reflection. And we just need to change some of these values. So the floor texture needs to go up to 499. The clone itself needs to go to positive 499. And now that's on the ceiling there. And you can see how well that's working. So there you go, that's the effect. Now you'll probably see, I don't know whether you can see in the playback, the texture is sort of crawling a bit and looking a bit noisy. And when you render it out, you're going to have to set the render quality, I should say, to best in order to avoid that. And the only other thing, obviously, you need to do is come back into the light art group, that main replicator for the bit in between. We need to crank those points up. Probably 50 will do. That's really not too bad. So there you go, that's how to build this project. I hope it's been an interesting one. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again another time.